My daughter-in-law told me, "You have 3 days to get out after my son's funeral." But my son was alive. What I discovered about her betrayal shook my family and changed everything. Rain fell in a soft drizzle over the small cemetery, the kind that seeps into your clothes and bones, making everything feel heavier than it already is. Harold Mitchell stood under a black umbrella, his hand trembling as the casket was lowered into the ground. His son Daniel, only 36, gone too soon, they said. A car crash on the way home from a late shift. Closed casket, the police explained. The impact had been too severe. Harold had asked to see him one last time, but his daughter-in-law, Melissa, had shaken her head. "It's better you remember him as he was," she'd whispered. Dabbing her eyes with a tissue, Harold had believed her. He wanted to. After losing his wife to cancer 3 years ago, Daniel had been his anchor, his reason to get out of bed each morning. And now he was standing in front of a casket, surrounded by murmured condolences and the hollow patter of rain on polished wood. When the crowd dispersed, Melissa approached him. She looked different, colder somehow, her grief too measured. "Harold," she said quietly, "I know this is hard, but I need to ask something difficult." He blinked, confused. "What is it?" "I'm going to sell the house," she said. "Daniel and I were behind on payments, and it's too much for me now. You've been living in the guest room since Margaret passed, but you'll need to find another place. I'll give you 3 days to pack." Her words hit harder than the rain. 3 days?" he repeated, his voice breaking. Melissa's expression didn't waver. "I'm sorry. I need space. I can't start healing while surrounded by reminders." Harold felt the ground shift beneath him. The home where he'd raised his son, shared every birthday, every holiday, every memory, gone in 3 days. He wanted to argue, to shout, but grief had numbed his voice. He nodded slowly and turned away, not trusting himself to speak. That night the house felt colder than ever. Daniel's jacket still hung by the door, his muddy boots still by the mat. Harold sat in the dark living room, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the window. He tried to pray, but no words came. On the second day, while gathering old photographs from the attic, Harold found Daniel's laptop tucked behind a box of camping gear. Melissa had said the police kept it for evidence, but clearly she'd missed this one. Curiosity overcame grief. He opened it. The laptop powered on easily, and Harold began clicking through old folders, invoices, reports, videos of Daniel laughing with his coworkers. Then one file caught his eye. C drive, backup, Parton's 128. He opened it, and a short video began to play. Daniel was on screen, alive, well, sitting in his truck. "If anything happens to me," he said, looking directly into the camera, "it wasn't an accident. If you're watching this, Dad, I need you to trust your instincts." Harold's breath caught. He replayed it again and again. Daniel's voice trembled slightly, but his eyes were clear, alert. It wasn't an accident. His heart pounded as he noticed the timestamp, 3 days before the supposed crash. That night, Harold didn't sleep. Memories flashed in fragments, Melissa insisting on a closed casket, the quick funeral arrangements, her haste to sell the house. Something wasn't right. On the third morning, his last in the house, Harold woke to the sound of Melissa talking on the phone downstairs. Her tone was sharp, hushed, but he caught fragments through the stairwell. "Yes, transfer it before anyone asks questions. No, his father doesn't suspect anything. After the insurance clears, we're done." Harold froze. His mind raced. Insurance? Daniel's life policy had been generous. If Melissa had faked something, if Daniel was alive somewhere... He stepped back, his pulse hammering. A floorboard creaked beneath him. Melissa fell silent. "Harold?" she called out, her voice turning syrupy sweet. "You're up early." He forced a smile as she appeared at the foot of the stairs, coffee cup in hand. "Just couldn't sleep," he murmured. "Understandable," she said, eyes studying him too closely. "You've had a long few days." That night, Harold quietly packed his bags, tucked Daniel's laptop into his duffel, and left the house without a word. He didn't know where he was going yet, but he knew one thing for certain. His son's story wasn't over. Somewhere, beneath the layers of lies and staged grief, Daniel Mitchell was still alive. Harold drove through the night, rain streaking across his windshield like veins of light. The rhythmic thump of the wipers was the only sound, but his mind was roaring. Every memory of Daniel, his last phone call, the way his voice had sounded, suddenly felt loaded with meaning. He replayed that final voicemail. "Dad, don't worry if I go quiet for a few days. Just trust me." At the time, Harold had assumed Daniel was working overtime again. Now it felt like a warning. By sunrise, Harold pulled into the small diner off Highway 41, where Daniel used to meet him for breakfast on Sundays. It smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease, just like it always had. He sat in their old booth, the one near the window, and opened Daniel's laptop. Again, he scrolled through folders until he found one labeled Jenkins Construction. That was the company Daniels had been working for before his accident. Inside were PDF reports, emails, and spreadsheets full of unfamiliar names. But one thing stood out, a series of messages between Daniel and a contact saved as RC. The last email, dated the day before the crash, read, "If what you're saying is true, they'll try to silence me. I'll send copies to Dad just in case. Meet me at the old quarry, midnight." Harold leaned back, his heart pounding. "They'll try to silence me?" The words burned into his mind. He jotted the quarry's location from the message and drove there that afternoon. The site had been abandoned for years, now just piles of rubble and overgrown weeds. But as Harold stepped out of the car, something caught his eye near the edge of a concrete pillar, a burnt patch of ground, blackened and circular, the remnants of a fire. He crouched down, brushing away debris until he found something small and metallic buried beneath the ash, a watch. His hands shook as he lifted it. It was Daniel's, the one Harold had given him for his 21st birthday, engraved on the back with "For every second we have," but there was no sign of Daniel. Harold sat there for a long time, staring at the empty quarry until a crunch of gravel made him turn. A man in a construction vest stood a few yards away watching him. "Can I help you, sir?" the man asked, voice wary. "I used to know someone who worked here," Harold said carefully. "Daniel Mitchell. Heard there was an accident nearby," the man's brow furrowed. "Mitchell? Yeah, I remember him. Quiet guy, good worker. But there wasn't any accident here, at least not one we heard about. He quit, couple of days before he disappeared, I guess. Quit?" Harold repeated, stunned. The man nodded, turned in his badge, said he was going out of town for a while. Didn't say why. Harold's pulse quickened. None of this made sense. If Daniel quit before his supposed death, who was in that casket? That night, Harold checked into a roadside motel under a false name. He locked the door, shut the curtains, and connected the laptop again. He noticed one hidden folder this time, faintly transparent, buried under system files. It required a password. He tried birthdays, pet names, even Margaret's middle name. Nothing worked. Finally, he remembered Daniel's motto, "Truth is light." He typed Truth 123. The folder opened. Inside were dozens of documents and voice memos. The first audio file crackled before Daniel's voice came through. "If you're hearing this, I've uncovered something big. Jenkins Construction isn't what it seems. They're laundering money through shell contracts and using fake accident reports to claim insurance. I've found proof, names, accounts, everything. Melissa doesn't know I'm recording this, but she's involved. She met with their rep last week. If I go missing, she's part of it." Harold froze. His own daughter-in-law involved in fraud, and maybe worse. He opened another file. Bank transactions, fake invoices, all tied to Jenkins Construction and an offshore account under the name M. Carter. Melissa Carter. He slammed the laptop shut and pressed a hand over his eyes, trembling. Everything was falling into place now. The sudden funeral, the closed casket, her rush to sell the house, the phone call about insurance. It wasn't grief driving her. It was greed. But then a new realization struck him cold. If Melissa had helped fake Daniel's death, then someone else had helped her pull it off. Someone with access to bodies, to records. Harold decided to visit the local coroner's office the next morning. When he arrived, the receptionist gave him a cautious smile. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," he said. "I'm looking for the death certificate of my son, Daniel Mitchell." She typed a few keys, frowned, and looked up. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no file under that name. No record of any Daniel Mitchell processed here in the past year." Harold's legs nearly gave out. He gripped the counter, whispering, "That's impossible." The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice. "If I were you, I'd be careful asking about things that aren't supposed to exist." He stared at her, stunned. "What do you mean?" She slid a small note toward him discreetly, eyes darting to the security camera above. On it was a single address scrawled in pencil: Elmwood Motel, room 12. Harold left. Heart hammering, the note clutched tightly in his fist. As he pulled up to the Elmwood Motel that evening, a figure stepped from the shadows near room 12. The man wore a hood, his face half hidden. When Harold got closer, the man whispered, "You shouldn't have come." "Mr. Mitchell," Harold froze. "You know who I am?" The hooded figure looked up, and Harold's world stopped cold. The face beneath the hood was his son's. Harold's knees buckled as he stared at the familiar face in the shadowed hallway of Elmwood Motel. Daniel's eyes, once filled with mischief and warmth, now carried a tension Harold had never seen before, a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and something darker, something Harold couldn't yet name. "Dad," Daniel's voice was barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same to you," Harold whispered, his voice tight with emotion. "Daniel, what happened? Why did she say you were dead?" Daniel glanced over his shoulder, checking the hallway, then stepped closer. "It's complicated. They said if anyone found out I was alive, I'd disappear for good. The funeral, the casket, all of it was staged. I had no choice." Harold gripped his son's arm. "No choice? Son, you were alive. You're alive. That's all that matters. We'll fix this." Daniel shook his head, a cold edge in his expression. "It's not that simple, Dad. Melissa isn't working alone. Jenkins Construction. They're tied to organized crime. They falsified the accident report, doctored medical files, and bribed officials. If I come back publicly, they'll come after me and you." Harold's chest tightened. He felt a surge of rage, the kind that only a parent could feel when someone threatens their child. "We've faced criminals before, son. You think I spent 30 years in financial investigations to run when someone threatens us?" Daniel's gaze softened, mixed with relief and fear. "I thought I could handle it alone. I didn't want to drag you into it. But now we need a plan. Melissa has gone to extreme lengths to secure control over my life, our assets, everything we've worked for. She's dangerous, Dad. More dangerous than I realized." Harold pulled Daniel into an embrace, holding him as tightly as he could. After 30 years of carefully navigating fraud, manipulation, and greed, Harold had learned that strength was only truly tested when protecting family. "We'll get through this," Harold said firmly. "Together. And the first step is proving to the world that you're alive." Daniel nodded, pulling back to meet his father's eyes. "There's a video call scheduled tonight with Melissa and her associates. She thinks I'm still dead, but she's planning to move the funds from my accounts to offshore. We can intercept it if we act now." Harold's mind raced. "Do we have the evidence?" "Yes," Daniel replied, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "Every email, transaction, phone recording, all of it. We just need the right moment to expose them." The father and son duo worked through the evening, checking every file, verifying bank records, and preparing a strategy. Every step had to be precise. One misstep could allow Melissa and her network to cover their tracks or, worse, harm Daniel. By midnight, they were ready. Harold set up a secure connection on his laptop, routing through multiple VPNs. Daniel dialed in from an undisclosed location. Both were masked by technology, but the tension in the air was palpable. The call came through. Melissa's voice rang across the encrypted line, calm, measured, and dripping with false sympathy. "Daniel, I don't understand why you haven't responded to my messages. Your father is worried sick. We've been trying to finalize your account transfers. You need to authorize them immediately." Daniel smiled coldly. "Authorize? Melissa, you really thought I'd stay silent." He hit a key, and the screen split, video feeds showing Harold, Daniel, and several associates from financial authorities monitoring the call. Melissa's smile faltered. "Dad, is that what's going on?" Harold stepped into view, voice steady but commanding. "Melissa, I believe you've been under the impression that my son is dead. He isn't, and your attempts to manipulate, defraud, and intimidate are over." Panic flashed across her face. "You can't. This is private. I have legal—" "Legal?" Harold's voice cut through her protests. "We have evidence of your forged documents, unauthorized account transfers, and complicity with Jenkins Construction's fraudulent schemes. Every move you made is recorded. Every lie you told is documented." Daniel's expression hardened. "I gave you access to everything. All the emails, the recordings, the account transfers. You thought faking my death would make me disappear. But you forgot one thing. You underestimated my father." Harold reached over to start the recording. "This call, Melissa, is being documented. We're sending a copy to federal authorities, the bank, and the Colorado State Attorney's Office. Your fraud, theft, and conspiracy will be exposed publicly." The line went silent for a moment. Then Melissa's voice quivered, a sharp edge of desperation creeping in. "You can't. People will think I'm crazy." Harold's voice was cold, unyielding. "The people you've defrauded will see the truth, and justice is on its way." By 1:30 a.m. the call was over. Harold and Daniel leaned back, exhausted but resolute. The night had been long, but a critical victory had been won. They had Daniel's life back, and now they had the evidence to reclaim his stolen inheritance. Yet, Harold knew this was only the beginning. Melissa's network was extensive, and the fallout from the deception would ripple far beyond just their family. But for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a sliver of hope. Daniel looked at his father. "Dad, thank you. I couldn't have done this alone." "I owe you everything," Harold smiled, exhausted but proud. "You're my son. I've always got your back. Now, let's make sure the world knows it, too." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the moonlight. For the first time, Harold felt a sense of control returning, not over the fraud, not over Melissa, but over his family. And that was everything. The following morning, Harold and Daniel moved quickly. They coordinated with the Colorado State Attorney's Office, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and Wells Fargo's Fraud Prevention Team. Every step had to be precise. Melissa had powerful allies and a network of shell companies designed to obscure her assets. One misstep could allow her to disappear with millions or retaliate. Harold reviewed the documents one last time. Bank statements showing attempted wire transfers, forged power of attorney documents, fake death certificates, and emails demonstrating coordinated fraud. He noticed a pattern. Melissa had used urgency and fear to manipulate Daniel, isolating him from friends and family. It was textbook psychological abuse wrapped in financial deception. By mid-morning, the first press release was drafted. The headline would read, "Colorado woman faked son-in-law's death to steal millions in inheritance and fraudulent transactions." Harold knew the media exposure was key. Public scrutiny would make it impossible for Melissa to continue her scheme. Daniel sat beside him, pale but resolute. "Dad, I'm ready. Let's do this," Harold nodded. "We have to remain calm. Melissa thrives on chaos. Our composure is our weapon." At noon, they went live. The state attorney's office held a press conference at a downtown Denver courthouse. Cameras flashed as Harold, flanked by federal agents, presented the evidence. Journalists leaned forward as he explained the scheme, the falsified accident report, the fraudulent accounts, the offshore transfers, and the staged funeral. Every detail was meticulously laid out. Melissa Mitchell exploited grief and trust for personal gain, Harold said, voice steady. She isolated my son from family, manipulated community sympathy, and attempted to steal assets that were rightfully his. "Today, justice begins," a reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Mitchell, were you worried about retaliation?" Harold met her gaze. "Of course, but fear cannot protect criminals. Exposure does." Across town, Melissa watched the press conference unfold via a private feed in her penthouse apartment. Her face drained of color as she realized the magnitude of the evidence against her. Her carefully constructed narrative had crumbled, and for the first time, she felt the weight of accountability. Back at the courthouse, agents handed Harold a report from Wells Fargo confirming the reversal of all unauthorized transactions. GoFundMe had refunded the donations made in the fake funeral campaign, and additional investigations into Melissa's prior financial dealings were underway. She hadn't just targeted Daniel. There were at least 4 other victims in the state, all elderly and vulnerable. Harold addressed the reporters again. This case is more than one family. It's about protecting communities from exploitation, about ensuring that those who prey on grief and vulnerability are held accountable. Let this serve as a warning. No deception is too sophisticated to be uncovered. Later that afternoon, Harold and Daniel returned home to regroup. Daniel sank into the sofa exhausted. "I didn't realize how deep this went," he admitted. "I thought I was just dealing with a crazy ex-wife. This is bigger than I imagined." Harold put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You were never alone in this, son. Melissa misjudged us. She underestimated our resolve, our family bond, and our willingness to fight for what's right. Now it's time to restore your life and protect others from similar schemes." Over the next week, federal agents began executing search warrants. Melissa's offices were raided, computers seized, files examined, and offshore accounts frozen. The FBI discovered a network of shell companies and accomplices she had enlisted in Colorado, Arizona, and Nevada. Daniel began to understand the psychological toll his death had exacted. He had been isolated, manipulated, and forced to live in fear while the world believed he was gone. But with the fraud exposed, he felt a cautious liberation. Harold and Daniel coordinated with local banks, ensuring extra layers of protection on Daniel's accounts. Trust in financial institutions had been shaken, but Harold's guidance helped him regain confidence. "No one can manipulate you again if you stay vigilant," Harold said. Melissa attempted one last desperate move, contacting Daniel through a private number, pleading for reconciliation. Daniel, firm and calm, refused. Harold reminded him, "She doesn't want reconciliation. She wants control. Don't give her that power." By the second week, the state attorney formally charged Melissa with elder financial abuse, wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Bail was set at $250,000, a sum she couldn't post given her frozen assets. The legal machinery was now in motion, and Harold felt a sense of justice beginning to unfold. The media coverage continued to intensify. Elder advocacy groups used the case as a teaching moment, producing seminars and public awareness campaigns. Harold began speaking publicly, drawing on his experience as a former FBI accountant. His message was simple but powerful. Vulnerability doesn't mean weakness, and vigilance can prevent exploitation. Daniel, slowly regaining his sense of normalcy, began rebuilding relationships with friends and colleagues he had cut off under Melissa's manipulation. Every connection strengthened his resolve to reclaim not only his inheritance, but his life. By the end of the month, the ripple effects of exposure had transformed the community. Churches implemented stricter donation oversight, banks updated fraud detection systems for vulnerable clients, and real estate agencies required more stringent vetting for high-risk transactions. Harold and Daniel had turned personal tragedy into a catalyst for systemic protection. Melissa, once confident in her deception, now faced public humiliation, criminal charges, and an irrevocable loss of credibility. She had gambled with grief and trust, and she had lost. For Harold and Daniel, the ordeal was far from over, but they had taken the first and most crucial step, reclaiming the truth, reclaiming Daniel's life, and exposing the web of lies that had ensnared their family. Melissa Mitchell's arrest made national headlines. The story of a daughter-in-law faking her husband's death to steal millions resonated far beyond Denver. Elder advocacy organizations cited it as a textbook example of financial abuse, and Harold was invited to speak at multiple conferences on elder protection and fraud prevention. His calm, methodical approach and first-hand experience gave him credibility few could match. Back home, Harold focused on rebuilding family life. Daniel and Jessica had returned to Denver permanently, moving into a modest apartment a few blocks away. The proximity allowed them to reconnect in ways that had been impossible during the months of isolation and deception. Every Sunday, they shared dinner together, filling Harold's home with laughter and the warmth of normal family routines. The legal process for Melissa continued. Federal prosecutors built a case with airtight evidence, fraudulent financial documents, forged death certificates, intercepted emails, and testimony from other victims. By mid-February, she faced multiple felony counts, including wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy. Harold attended every hearing, his presence a constant reminder of the lives Melissa had tried to destroy. Daniel, once naive and manipulated, emerged stronger. He enrolled in financial literacy courses, learned to recognize manipulative behaviors, and became actively involved in community programs aimed at preventing elder exploitation. Jessica, equally resilient, supported him while pursuing her own career as a certified financial planner, inspired by the ordeal her fiancé had endured. Harold also took an active role in training law enforcement and community groups. He created workshops demonstrating common tactics used by fraudsters, manufactured urgency, emotional manipulation, isolation from family, and pressure to make rapid financial decisions. He emphasized that vulnerability didn't equate to helplessness. Knowledge and vigilance could be powerful protective tools. Meanwhile, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and other financial institutions implemented stricter oversight for accounts held by elderly clients. Automated alerts, mandatory secondary verification, and monitoring for unusual activity became standard procedures. The ripple effect of Melissa's crimes transformed banking and real estate practices in Denver, providing lasting protection for vulnerable adults. At home, life gradually normalized. Harold found joy in watching Daniel and Jessica build their future, and when his granddaughter, Margaret Elizabeth, was born, he was overwhelmed with pride and love. The baby embodied resilience, intelligence, and a stubborn determination that reminded him of his late wife. Family gatherings became regular events, reinforcing bonds that Melissa had tried to sever. Through the community initiatives and personal advocacy work, Harold discovered a renewed sense of purpose. He volunteered as a consultant for elder financial protection programs, sharing insights from his FBI accounting background. Each seminar he led reminded participants that awareness, documentation, and family involvement were key defenses against exploitation. Melissa's downfall continued. Her professional licenses were permanently revoked, she was prohibited from financial services, and civil lawsuits from victims kept her entangled in legal battles long after her sentencing. Her 5-year federal sentence, combined with the restitution she owed, effectively ended her ability to commit further financial crimes. Public humiliation and the thorough exposure of her network served as both justice and deterrent. The emotional healing was perhaps the most profound aspect. Daniel and Harold, once fractured by deceit and manipulation, rebuilt trust, communication, and love. Jessica seamlessly integrated into the family, her intelligence, loyalty, and protective nature creating a new support network. Together they established new boundaries, traditions, and a shared understanding of vigilance, empathy, and mutual care. The community, too, had grown stronger. St. Mark's Church implemented stricter donation oversight, establishing volunteer committees to regularly check on elderly parishioners. The Denver Elder Justice Coalition formalized its programs, ensuring early detection of fraud and providing resources to families at risk. Financial education became a priority across churches, senior centers, and local organizations. Through the turmoil, Harold realized a key lesson. Isolation is often what enables fraudsters to succeed. By fostering connection, awareness, and vigilance, families could prevent exploitation. Daniel, once a victim of deceit, became a living example of resilience, proving that knowledge and community could restore both security and trust. Even as the media coverage waned, Harold remained active, helping others navigate financial deception, mentoring families, and advocating for systemic changes. Every success reinforced his belief that personal loss could fuel widespread protection and education. Melissa's scheme, though devastating, had inadvertently created a ripple of awareness, accountability, and reform that extended far beyond Harold's family. It was a reminder that even in the face of deception, careful action, courage, and community could triumph. Harold's story became a touchstone for families, financial institutions, and law enforcement alike. illustrating the importance of vigilance, trust, and standing up against exploitation. 2 years had passed since Melissa Mitchell's conviction. Harold's life had transformed completely. The house where Melissa had once demanded he leave now thrived with warmth, laughter, and the presence of family. Daniel and Jessica visited multiple times a week, each gathering a celebration of resilience and renewed bonds. Harold's granddaughter, Margaret Elizabeth, was growing rapidly, already showing a remarkable intellect and determination that reminded him of both his late wife and his own steadfastness. Harold's advocacy work continued to expand. Statewide elder fraud prevention programs sought his guidance, citing his experience as a prime example of how vigilance and community involvement could prevent exploitation. He traveled across Colorado, conducting seminars at senior centers, churches, and community halls, emphasizing that vulnerability was not weakness, and that asking for help was a sign of strength, not incompetence. His message resonated deeply, as countless families realized the importance of staying connected and alert. Daniel and Jessica had settled into a routine that blended seamlessly with Harold's life. Sundays were reserved for family dinners where stories, advice, and laughter were shared openly. Tuesdays and Fridays were dedicated to phone calls and technology troubleshooting, but also to discussions about financial planning, investments, and the importance of protecting loved ones. The bond between father and son had matured into one of mutual respect, understanding, and shared responsibility. Jessica, inspired by the ordeal she and Daniel had endured, pursued a career in financial planning with a focus on protecting elderly clients. She drew on the lessons learned from Melissa's schemes to educate clients about the warning signs of fraud, developing workshops and resources that reached far beyond Denver. Her proactive approach ensured that families could spot manipulative behaviors before they caused harm. The Denver Elder Justice Coalition, which Harold helped guide, had grown into a formidable force. Law enforcement, social services, financial institutions, and healthcare providers collaborated to detect early signs of elder exploitation. The coalition had successfully intercepted several potential fraud attempts using patterns that Harold had identified during Melissa's case. Each prevention reinforced the value of awareness, vigilance, and collective action. Melissa's continued legal battles remained a cautionary tale. Civil suits ensured that her victims received restitution, but more importantly, her downfall became an example of the consequences of deceit and manipulation. The publicity surrounding the settlements, combined with Harold's seminars, educated the public and discouraged would-be scammers. Her name became synonymous with elder fraud, serving as both a warning and a case study for professionals in real estate, banking, and legal fields. At home, Harold embraced the simple joys of life, watching his granddaughter grow, guiding his son through life's challenges, and sharing meals with family created a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The trauma caused by Melissa's betrayal had transformed into determination, ensuring that neither he nor anyone else would be vulnerable to such manipulation again. The emotional healing, reinforced by community involvement, had given Harold a renewed sense of self and fulfillment. The personal growth he and Daniel experienced was profound. Daniel, once naive and easily manipulated, now possessed financial literacy, emotional resilience, and a keen awareness of manipulative behaviors. Jessica's intelligence, empathy, and protective instincts complemented the family perfectly, creating a united front that Melissa could never have broken. Their combined efforts reinforced Harold's belief that true family protection came not just from love, but also from vigilance and education. The local community also flourished. Churches, banks, and civic organizations implemented the protocols Harold had advocated for: rigorous verification for large transactions, background checks for those managing donations, and mandatory reporting of suspicious activity. Elder abuse awareness became a core part of community education programs, creating a culture of proactive protection and mutual support. On the second anniversary of Melissa's sentencing, Harold reflected on the journey, What had begun as a betrayal and near catastrophic loss had evolved into a story of empowerment, advocacy, and the reaffirmation of family bonds. The lessons learned were now embedded in community practices, legal reforms, and family routines. Elderly citizens felt safer, families were more connected, and Harold's experience became a beacon of hope for anyone facing manipulation or exploitation. As he watched Daniel and Jessica play with Margaret Elizabeth in the backyard, Harold realized the true legacy of his ordeal: vigilance, love, and connection could overcome deceit, and even the darkest experiences could yield a brighter, safer future. The home that once symbolized isolation and vulnerability now radiated security, trust, and the enduring strength of family. Harold's message was clear: protect your family, trust your instincts, maintain community connections, and ensure that exploitation and manipulation never find fertile ground. By doing so, one could transform grief and betrayal into wisdom, resilience, and an enduring legacy of protection.